offered a grant of about $3 million and gave it to this man, Dr. Arpad Pusztai, the world's leading expert in his field, worked at the top nutritional research institute at the UK. And he was working with 20 scientists over 3 different institutes to create the long-term safety testing protocol that was to be implemented as policy for the UK government and was eventually planned to be implemented EU-wide. Now, what Dr. Pusztai did is he created some potatoes with his team, genetically engineered to produce an insecticide. They took a gene from a snowdrop plant, they put it into the potato, and the potato was supposed to kill certain insects that tried to eat the potato plant. But he put his potatoes through the protocol, and he fed it to rats, and he fed, with a complete and balanced diet, the genetically engineered potato. Raw, baked, and boiled, 3 different groups. He also took natural potatoes as a control. Then he took a third control, natural potatoes spiked with the pesticide that the genetically engineered potatoes were engineered to produce. So this was natural potato plus insecticide. This was GM potato creating the same insecticide in the same quantity. And then there was natural. It turns out only this group got sick. Only the group eating the genetically engineered potatoes showed significant damage in 10 days. The groups that ate the potato or the potato spiked with the insecticide did not show that damage. So what caused the problem? Somehow it was the process of genetically engineering the potato that apparently created changes in the potato that caused damage to the rats. Now, Dr. Pusztai, soon after discovering this, was invited to speak on television in the UK, and he was given permission by his director to discuss a bit about his research, not the details because it hadn't been published yet. And so he was interviewed, and it went on for 2.5 minutes, and he said he didn't think it was appropriate for the companies to be treating the population as guinea pigs. Well, when this came out in Europe, it was very significant. The top researcher in his field, working at the top research institute, working on the protocols for testing that was going to be part of the EU and the UK government's protocols, was saying that GM foods were unsafe. Well, he was a hero at his prestigious institute. The director took all the phone calls, actually rerouted the calls so that it wouldn't actually get to Arpad Pusztai. It all came to the director. He wrote his own press release that this is very world-class studies. He was expecting that a lot of money would be starting to pour into the institute to repeat this. However, he was a little naive, right? In retrospect, the TV show was played Monday night. Tuesday afternoon, 2 phone calls were allegedly placed from the UK Prime Minister's office, forwarded through the receptionist to that director. The next morning, Dr. Pusztai was fired from his job after 35 years. He was silenced with threats of a lawsuit. The 20-member research team was disbanded. They never implemented the long-term safety protocols. Instead, the Institute started putting out a series of statements designed to destroy the reputation of Dr. Pusztai, and in particular his study, and to bolster the reputation of the biotechnology industry. And for 7 months, they continued a tirade, and he was unable to speak until in the 7th month, he was invited to speak to the Parliament. And that lifted the gag order and allowed him to get his data back, which was then submitted and published in The Lancet. And it remains the most in-depth animal feeding study yet on genetically engineered foods, showing that it's the process that is likely dangerous. Now, I asked Dr. Pusztai, I said, what was your most shocking moment? Can anyone guess why I asked that question? Because I was writing a book. I'm looking for shocking moments. I don't want this to be boring. I figured I needed to get the X-File stuff, you know? And I got it. I got UC Berkeley professor who says the senior Mexican government official threatened him, claiming we know where your children go to school, trying to get him not to publish evidence that GM corn had contaminated the indigenous corn varieties in Mexico. I got Fox TV news reporters shut up by Monsanto's attorney promising dire consequences to Fox News and Rupert Murdoch if they blew the whistle on their genetically engineered bovine growth hormone. I got threats from Monsanto's attorney that canceled books that caused shredded magazines that rigged research, hidden evidence that was made public, stolen documents from the FDA that were published. Here's one. When Monsanto wanted to show that injections of bovine growth hormone did not interfere with fertility of cows, they apparently added cows to the study that were pregnant before they were injected. And that was from stolen documents from the FDA, later published. So I was looking for X-File type stuff, and I got it. And I was asking a question, and this has become, and this has become the world's best-selling book on GMOs, because people like to read that kind of stuff. So I wove into those stories why this stuff is dangerous and the science. So people don't necessarily read it for the science, but they get it by the time the story is over. So I was the only one that asked Dr. Pustai that question because I was the only one that reported on it. And it turns out it wasn't being fired from his job that was the most shocking moment. It wasn't discovering the damage to the rats. It was months earlier when he was still a pro-GM scientist working in his office. The director, Professor Philip James, walked in, put a stack of about 700 pages on the desk. And they invited Arpad's wife, Susan, into the room. She was a senior researcher there. The professor said, "These are the submissions from the 6 or 7 biotech companies for their crops submitted to the committee to approve them." He was on the committee with 11 others. "The Minister of Agriculture is meeting in Brussels and wants a scientific opinion on these pages." Now, Arpad Pustai looked at these pages on his desk. He looked at his director, who he had known for years, and looked back at the pages and realized this man would never read these many pages. Nor would the other 11 members of the committee. They were committee men, they were not working scientists. He and his wife, however, had been part of the team designing the ideal testing protocol for more than 2 years. They were among the most qualified humans on earth to evaluate the stack. He said, "How much time do we have?" The professor said, 2.5 hours. Those 2.5 hours were the most shocking moments. He said to me, "Jeffrey, it was a turning point in my life. I realized what I was doing and what they were doing was diametrically opposed. I was doing safety studies. They were doing as little as possible to get their foods on the market as quickly as possible." He said it was flimsy, superficial, poor. He said, "You know what bad science is?" And this was bad science. So he called the minister and said, "I wasn't planning to give you a strong recommendation after only 2.5 hours, but there's definitely not enough information to allow these foods to be fed to human beings." The minister said, "Well, I don't know why you're telling me this. Those foods are already approved. They've been on the market for 2 years." So it was a shock also to find out that the committee just let it fly by. And that the foods, that none of the scientists knew that the GM foods had already been on the market. The people in the UK didn't know. But what Arpad Pustai realized was that his potatoes would have made it onto the market also if industry had done their studies on his potatoes. Because they didn't check for the things he checked for. What was worse, however, was that the soy and corn and tomatoes that made it to the market had never been tested for those things, and were created from the same process that he used to create the potatoes. Remember, it was the process that caused the problem, not the insecticide. So what happened to those rats? Well, they had potentially precancerous cell growth in the digestive tract, smaller brains, livers, and testicles, partial atrophy of the liver, damaged immune system, among others. Here's a picture of the intestinal wall with the GM-fed rats on the right and the non-GM on the left, showing proliferative cell growth. Here's a picture of the stomach wall of the rats to scale. This is potentially precancerous. They didn't find tumors, but this was 10 days. And this kind of reaction might be happening in us, but we don't know because the soy and corn and cotton and canola and all that, they've never been tested to the extent that Arpad Pustai's tests had tested for the potato. So this is the first possible problem that the process itself can cause significant damage to the DNA and to the composition of plants. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to change channels here a bit. I told you that my first book was about shocking moments. It's a storybook. So that was a story. The first chapter of the book is about Arpad Pustai. There's a chapter about this, there's different chapters about different stories. But then I wrote the book, I traveled around the world, 30 countries, 6 continents, and was speaking to a lot of senior political leaders.